Okay, I'm going to try to record some of the things that I am doing for mixing the sourdough so it can help guide you as well, besides any written instructions that you have. So the first thing that I did was this morning, I wanted to create the leaven that I use making, the starter that I need. So I do a 1-5-5 ratio. In this case, I'm making 4 loaves of bread since I'm making extra bread for my daughter now to help her out while she's been tired, in her pregnancy. So I've been mixing up 4 loaves at a time. So for the recipe I use, it requires a total of 300 grams of, no, let's see. Sorry, that's wrong. 300 would have been 2 loaves. I need 600 grams of starter, which will be for 4 loaves. So I started with 60 grams of starter and then 300 grams of water and 300 grams of flour. So when I mixed it, here you can see my jar, I put the rubber band. That's where the starter began after I mixed it, everything together. You can see it's more than doubled right now. You can see it's nice and bubbly. Theoretically, I probably could wait a little bit longer to see if this continues to rise, but it is more than doubled. It's, active and ready to go. So I'm going to start mixing up the dough. Now I do also use like this log. I track what I do for the loaves. So I will put, how much water and starter and salt and all of that, the flour. If I mix flours, I'll put how many grams of each I put in there. And then I track, when I am doing stretch and folds, how long it sat, just to kind of track how the results came out. And if something didn't work right, go back and figure out what it is. Now this is evening time already. It's after 7 p.m. And so I'm going to mix this, do all the stretch and folds tonight, and I'm going to let it rise overnight to doing the bulk ferment. And I don't want that to ferment too much. So I'm actually going to have the water colder. The colder the temperature, the slower it will actually eat through, the gluten or the kind of the protein in the flour, because I don't want this to over ferment overnight. A lot of times I will have the starter prepped overnight and then I mix everything in the morning and then I can watch it. But my schedule is really tight this weekend, so I'm going to go ahead and do the overnight ferment. And with the amount of starter that we have in here, it would ferment faster than if someone had like 50 or 100 grams of starter per loaf. We're having 150 grams per loaf. So I'm going to go ahead and get all my stuff ready and I'll show you those next steps. Okay, so I have some things ready. I have already measured flour and salt together in a bowl just to make it easy when I'm going to mix. What I'm going to do is weigh the starter and then mix the water, kind of blend that up together so it, kind of incorporates the starter into the water, and then I'll add the flour and the salt. So I use a scale, and some people use measurements like cups and things like that, but that's not ideal. Different flours can weigh different amounts, and you can kind of push too hard on the flour or scoop it up. So anyway, it's better to weigh by grams. Let me show you my scale here. Let me flip. Okay, so I have my scale. Now this scale is a little temperamental. If you don't finish measuring in a certain period of time, it will shut off quickly. So let me just show you kind of what I do. I actually have a nice bowl here that will allow me to mix enough for 2 loaves. So I'm going to put this on, and then I'm going to zero out the scale. So you can see it gives me a weight. I actually put on the bottom, in case I ever have issues, kind of what it comes out to be in case, again, if it shuts off before I was realizing it. So you can see it was going between 14, 15, close enough. 1 gram's not going to matter. So I'm going to turn this so it's 0, and then I'm going to put in 300 grams. So I'm going to put this down for a second. I'll measure the 300 grams and then I'll be right back. Okay, so you can see I have the 300 grams. Again, if I'm not wanting this to turn off, sometimes I'll just push this down just a little bit for it to stay active. And then right now what I'm going to do is add the water. So I'm going to zero this out again. And for this recipe, I'm going to, since I only have bread flour that I'm going to be mixing in right now. I'm just going to use 650 grams. I had bumped it up to about 685 if I was mixing in whole wheat flour. So I'm just going to, and be careful when you are measuring to slow down before you get close to the number you're expecting. Otherwise you will put in more than you like. So I'm going to just start slowing down a little bit. I want 650. Again, if I'm a little worried it's going to turn off before I get close, I'm just going to push down on that just a little bit. Your scale may not have issues, but mine likes to turn off faster than I prefer. So, and actually now it says I got to 667, which is probably okay, but for purposes of this, let me show you what I would do. I'm going to just grab a small, I'll get this little measuring cup, I guess, here. And I'm just going to take out just a tiny bit of water until I see where I'm at. So it doesn't have to be perfect actually, but Rebecca kind of laughs at me. I like to be as close as possible. So there we are, 650, which is what I wanted. I could just dump out this little excess of water. And then I'm going to mix this. Now I'm using a KitchenAid mixer now. I'm going to put the bread hook on. I'm going to just turn this on for maybe 30 seconds, 60 seconds, just to get it incorporated. And then I'm going to mix the flour. Okay, as you see, I'm about ready to mix, and you can see that my starter is floating on the water. People do talk about the float test. However, from what I've heard, that is not actually something that will tell you if your starter is really going to rise well or not. People say, like, if it's bubbly and active, it's got air in there, it's going to float. But you could have something that doesn't float that might do well, or maybe you have some that has air in it, but it's still not strong enough to raise your bread. So anyway, I'm going to turn this on just to get that incorporated just a tiny bit. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I do like it to be where it's a little bit more homogeneous. Turn that on for, like I said, usually 30 to 60 seconds or so. And that actually looks good enough for me. So then what I'm going to do is just pop in the flour and turn that on. So just give me a minute and I will do that too. Okay, as you can see, I've added the flour, so I'm just going to put this down. Now, when you're mixing dough, you don't want it to be above the level 2 when it's mixing. Otherwise, you could theoretically burn out your motor. Now, you can mix everything by hand, but now that I used to do by hand, but now that I do 2 loaves at a time, I don't. I just use the KitchenAid. And I let this mix until basically there's no dry flour. It doesn't need to mix too much more than that. Then I'm going to let it sit. It's called fermentalize, because fermentalize is when the starter's already added. Autolyze, people will just mix flour and water for the water to be soaked up by the flour and then add in the starter later. But I just add everything together. And again, I'm going to let this mix. If for some reason we had an issue with this getting incorporated, then of course I could stop, like grab a spatula, kind of mix it up a little bit together, but I don't have a problem. I'll just let it go just until it starts to get kind of all cohesive. Okay, so other than just the little bits on the side of the bowl here that you see are just kind of still attached, I'm going to use a spatula to get that off. So I'm just going to turn this off. Now I do use a silicone spatula to kind of get off. Let me grab that. Okay, so I basically just use this to clean this off just a tad. Get as much of the dough as possible into the bowl. And then this is not able to get off the sides as easily. Like if you see, if I try to scrape this down, it's a little bit hard and it leaves stuff on there. So I've started using a wooden spoon to actually clean the dough off the sides of the bowl. But again, I use this just to try to get as much of the dough off of this dough hook. I'm going to be mixing up another round, so I'm not too worried if there's any left on here. Again, I make 4 at a time now. So this is only 2 loaves, so I don't have to worry too much about that not being perfect. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is just take this over to my little workspace. Now I'm going to let this probably just sit in this bowl here for the hour, and then I can transfer it here. You want to have a straight-sided container so you can kind of measure how it is increasing in size. That is also based on the temperature of the dough. What I could do is grab my thermometer and take that temperature now and see what that is. But I'm going to set the timer for an hour. And then I'm going to start the other batch, and then I'll probably take the temperature because it's already almost 8 o'clock. This still has to sit for an hour, and then it's a couple hours of stretch and folds most of the time. So I think what I'm going to do today, instead of doing an hour, I think I'm just going to do 30 minutes to let this sit. I'm going to mix the other one up and then try to get this done, because otherwise I'm going to be up really late, waiting to do those stretch and folds. Usually you do 4 sets over, let's say 30 minutes each. Today I may do 20 minutes each, just to save myself basically at least half an hour in the time, because again, it will be late otherwise tonight. But I wanted to get this bread done. And I just said I was going to let it sit in the bowl, but I need the bowl to mix up the other loaf. So I am going to transfer it into here. I'll mark on the outside with some painter's tape where it is, and then I might leave the other one for the half an hour. Okay, I'm about to mix up my second batch. So this is going to have more than 300 grams in there. And the difference I'm going to put in a discard jar. So I do have another jar here that is in my refrigerator. Sometimes I will take it and put it in a clean jar. This one I'm just going to dump the extra in. So when I get my 300 grams, then the rest that I can scoop out of here, I'm going to put in the discard jar. And then what I like to do is pour some water into here to try to get out the last bits of the starter so it doesn't go to waste, to mix into the bowl. So I'll show you that in just a minute. I need to just get everything measured again and then get this one mixed. Here is the jar I scraped out starter. It's a little bit hard because it's, obviously a tall jar, a little bit narrow neck, but you can see there's still some in here. And so what I'm going to do is put water in here and just shake it up really good. And that will be part of the water that I'm measuring into the bowl. You can see I've got that ready to go. And that will help get the last bits out of there so nothing goes to waste. Okay, so you can see I put the water in, I shook it up, got a lot of it off the sides. There's just a little bit of the bubbles. And then what I'm going to do, once again, is if I leave this on, it's too heavy and it says it won't read it. But if I start it at 0 and if I put it on the scale, and then I zero it out, it will still allow me to do it. So once again, I want 650 grams. This is not going to be 650, but let me just pour in here. See what we have so far. And then what I do often, you can kind of see inside that there's still some there. I'm going to get my little spatula and I'm going to scrape out whatever doesn't come out easily. And then I'll add the rest of the water. So as I said, it happens sometimes. I did not get enough my work done before the scale turned off. So once again, it doesn't like when this is too heavy. I'm just going to turn this on. I'm going to put this back on the scale and then I'm going to zero it out. And I need now another 354 grams approximately. So I'm not sure if I have enough in here, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so I'm just gonna It should be close. There we go, 354, perfect. So now I'm going to mix this, add the flour, do what we did on the last batch. Okay, now it is time to do stretch and folds. I'm actually going to try to do this with one hand because I'm holding the camera. But dough here is very sticky, and if I were to put my hands in this, it's going to stick all over my hands. So ideally, you could spritz your hands with water. I do generally have a water bottle that I use, but since I'm going to try to do this with one hand, I'm just going to turn on the sink here. Unfortunately, I didn't realize the camera stopped recording when I went to wash my hands, and I've already done the stretch and folds, and you can see it's already looking a lot better. This is how it looked when we first mixed it up, very shaggy. This is after one stretch and fold, and you can see it's looking a lot nicer. So we're gonna let this one sit for just a little bit too, and then I'll capture how I did the stretch and folds with this one since it didn't work with the last one. Okay, so another thing that you want to be aware of is that when you're cleaning your dishes that had starter or any of the dough in there, you want to make sure that that does not like clog up your pipes, right? Because it will freeze very hard like cement and block your pipes. So generally you want to soak everything in cold water and then rinse it off really good. If you're going to do it in the sink and you have any bits, make sure it gets as dissolved as possible. And then, run cold water for quite a while. So what I do, I can just show you here. Let me find. I have my jar here in the sink, and obviously I took my KitchenAid, which obviously has some of the dough on there, and I just put it in the cold water. I let that sit, and then I'm going to make sure that I completely wash all of this and get lots of water to have it, as you can see, in the jar. It's mainly water. We want to make sure it's dissolved, and then we're going to dump that down the drain, or sometimes I'll dump it outside. The plants apparently like to have the starter. One other thing that I wanted to mention is on my spatula. You can see this is what I was using to get the starter out of the jar. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually let this completely dry, flake it off, and this is only the flour and water, not the dough that has salt in it. But what I'm going to do, here's my dishes I still need to wash from my prep, but I have a little baggie here. You can see that I've put dried starter in here. So if something were to happen, say we lose power, our refrigerator dies, it's not able to stay fed, or something. If anything ever happens, or one time I actually took this with me to my parents' house, and then I rehydrated some so I could actually mix some dough together, but I could grind this up, mix it with water, create a brand new starter. So anytime any just starter, again, just the flour or water, you can let it dehydrate. Now, if you haven't saved any at all and you have starter that was active and you want to save it and dehydrate it, you can also put it on some parchment paper, just spread it really thin, let it dry, and then you basically have a backup plan in case anything happens. I've seen lots of people posting that their starter got mold and then they would have to start all over. So if you have some that is dehydrated, you can easily just add water, start it over again. So I would recommend, until you get a decent amount built up, to save any of the little bit off your spatulas or something from your starter. Just little by little you can build up, and in case something happens, you have some to replace it. Okay, I definitely have not waited the amount of time I normally would for the dough, the second batch, to sit, absorb the water, do the fermentalize. But again, it's getting late. It's about 8:37 right now. And usually, again, you do stretch and folds over about a 2-hour period. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit, so it may affect the dough slightly, but we'll see what happens. So again, normally what I would do, I've got this spray bottle here. I actually have it labeled where it says water on here so that it doesn't get mixed up with anything else that I might have, like a vegetable wash or something like that. And I normally would just spritz my hand, but since I'm holding the phone, I can't easily do that. So once again, I'm just going to wet my hand in the sink, and then I will show you the stretch and fold. So let me just get my hand wet. I'll be right back. flip this around. All right, so once again, here is the dough. Again, I normally would have it sit at least a minimum of 30 minutes, usually an hour. This has actually only been here, let's see, I mixed it around 8:12 and it's 8:38. So there we go, a little bit earlier than I like. But anyway, hand wet, you can see some more. I'm gonna grab in the corner, kind of get my hands under there a little bit. Just grab, pull it up a little bit. You just don't want it to tear. And again, this really hasn't sat long enough to not tear. So hopefully it doesn't. I'm just going to stretch it just a little bit. Once again, pull the corner. As you can see, stretching it just a bit. Grab the corner, pull it up, pull it to the middle, and kind of pull it to the middle. So that's what we're going to do, just to make sure that we are strengthening the dough. And I'm going to let that sit. And then in half an hour, again, maybe today I'll do it in 20 minutes instead, just because I want this process to go a little bit faster. But normally I let it sit for 30 minutes and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and let this sit. And then when I do coil folds, I'll try to grab that as well so you can see what that looks like. Okay, I'm also just going to show you that I have this thermometer that I put in here. My husband bought me actually this expensive one here. It comes in a set of 2. It's electronic, it has Bluetooth, and I actually can use an app to monitor the temperature. This is more than necessary. Just a regular digital thermometer that you could capture the temperature would be good. But this will tell me what the dough temperature is and I can monitor it. I'm actually going to put the other one in here. So let me grab. I'm just going to obviously just stick it in the dough. And then I'll go to the app and I will see what it says that the temperature is. And I'll be monitoring that. So anyway, again, you don't need anything fancy, but you do want to know the dough temperature because that will determine how long you bulk ferment. If you're going to do any cold proofing, because you don't want it to be too warm going in the fridge, because it takes quite a while for it to cool down. Okay, so it is the morning now, and this actually rose more than I expected overnight. I did have the temperature a little bit warmer than I had expected. It was measuring about 72 last night when I went to bed. Actually, the whole time. But anyway, you can see this more than doubled. You can see my tape where it was. The top of the tape is where the top of the dough had been. So this potentially could be a bit overproof. Thankfully, the temperature was still, like I said, about 72. So hopefully we're still okay. But you can see one rose a bit more than the other one. So what I'm going to do now, I have washed down the counter here. I'm going to put it down on the counter. I'm going to split each dough in 2 and do what's called a pre-shape. And then I'm going to let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes. And then I'm going to shape one more time. And I will see if I will be able to shape. Recording, of course, that requires 2 hands. So we will see. But I'm going to dump out the dough and use a bench scraper to split it and go from there. Okay, hopefully you're going to be able to see this. The dough obviously is out on the counter now. If you need to use like a silicone spatula to get it started out of your container, you can. I usually just turn it over and let it dump out on its own. I do have a bench scraper here that I'm going to use to cut. And just like we do with dough that's sticky when we're going to do stretch and folds, water helps keep it from sticking. So I'm going to wet my left hand, I'm going to wet the bench scraper, and so when we turn this out, this was what was on the bottom of the container, which is a little bit more sticky. So usually what we do is cut the dough, and you could measure and weigh just to make sure it's double, but I just eyeball it to see. And then you kind of want to scoop it up and flip it over. Now again, this dough looks like it is overproofed. Unfortunately, it did a little bit too much overnight, so this one's going to be a little bit harder to work with. It may come out a little bit more flat when we bake, but I'm going to do the best that I can with this dough. Once again, let me just get some wet hands. So generally what you want to do is kind of stretch it. You don't want to get the bubbles out too much, but we're going to just kind of stretch it out just a little bit where we can then fold it. So there's a couple different ways that you can fold it. People usually say like make an envelope or something. Let me just show you. So in this case, let's start with the right side, fold over to the middle, pull up the left side on top. Then on the bottom, you can kind of stick it up maybe about a third of the way, and then you want to kind of roll it into like a ball shape, and then they call them like push and pulls or whatever. You want to build some tension, so you're going to kind of put your hands and kind of push it under and turn it at the same time. And if you need to, you can also use your bench scraper. So if you did that, you would have one hand under and then the bench scraper, and you kind of turn it and pull towards you, and then like push and then pull towards you, and then push, pull towards you. Basically that builds a little bit of tension. I'm going to move that out of the way. Of course now that's going to be kind of in the camera, but I'm going to do it one more time. Let me see if I can move this a little bit more. So again, we're going to just stretch. Let me get a little bit more water on my hands because this one is very sticky because it's overproofed, I believe, but not so much that we can't make bread. So again, stretch it out. Now in this case, rather than starting from the sides, I'll show you also, some people say you could start from the bottom. So I'm gonna, pull this. Now, if you're ever gonna do inclusions, people call that laminating, and that's where you would stretch it out, really thin. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention is window pane. Let me see if I show you the window pane. If you can pull the dough until you can see through it before tearing, that's called window pane. You want your dough to have window pane. Okay, so I'm going to just stretch this out just a little bit, and we're gonna pull up the bottom, fold it up, then kind of fold over the middle, to meet in the middle, and then once again start to fold up, kind of tuck, and then once again I'm gonna use my bench scraper, and I'm gonna get this just a little bit wet, and I'm gonna stick it under, and I'm gonna put my hands kind of under, and I'm gonna turn it and like pull it towards me a little bit, and then push this up, pull it down, push it up, pull it down. And then I'm just gonna let those sit there for about 20 to 30 minutes. Give it one more time to relax. We'll do the shaping one more time, and then we're gonna put it in the bannetons. Now while this is waiting, I'm gonna season or get the bannetons ready. So what I have here, let's see, like here's a banneton. You can use it without the liner. I prefer the liner, but you could take this part off and then season it really well with the flour. This is rice flour that I literally took white rice, put it in the blender, blended it until it's very fine. All-purpose flour will absorb water from your dough, and the dough will stick, so you want things that aren't going to stick. So basically, I just sprinkle like a little bit in there, this, and then I just rub it all around to make sure that this cloth is covered as much as possible. I'm going to do that with all four, since I have 4 loaves, and I do have 4 of these. Now if you don't have these, you can just get a regular bowl and get some tea towels, and then flour your tea towels. So I'm going to make sure that this is well floured. So I don't know if it will show very well, but that's what we have. So I'm going to do that for all 4. I'm going to let this sit for just a few minutes because this is close to being overproofed. I think I'm just going to let it rest for about 20 minutes and then I'll be back. Okay, I'm about to cut and shape this one. I did forget to mention that while this was in the container, if you look at the bottom or the sides, you'll see bubbles. You can see where like all of these indentations were. Those were basically the bubbles that we were seeing. That shows you that your dough is very happy. Although once again, since this did so much overnight, this is probably on the overproofed side, but you want to see some bubbles in your dough. Now, depending on how warm your dough is, you have to cut off bulk ferment earlier. So like if you're at 75, 78 degrees, you really want to maybe have it only like a 50% or less rise, because again, it takes longer for it to cool down when it's in your refrigerator. This is, like I said, it was 71, 72 degrees, still a little bit warmer than I had wanted. I still am going to cold proof though, because I do not have time to bake this morning. I have errands and appointments. Okay, it's been about 20 minutes since we did the first 2, so here are those 2. But I also wanted to point out, like, there is a big bubble that's forming here. You don't really want to have the big bubbles, so I'm just going to pop that one. So if you see any big bubbles, go ahead and pop those. But I'm going to now shape these other ones. So, all right, I'm going to start with this one that is in the way of the camera. Flip it over again. So the less sticky part is kind of on the bottom. Again, I'm going to wipe my hands here for a second. We're just going to basically do the same thing. We want to just stretch it out just a little bit and form it again in a rectangle. You don't really want to get out the air that is in here, but you can shake it just a little bit like this if needed, just to stretch it out some. Pull it. Okay, so I'm not going to do too much. Once again, we can flip this up, flip this over. Now, some people, instead of just flipping it over, what they do is they take like a corner and they fold over, then they take the other corner and they fold over, and then they kind of pull it down from the top. Pull this one down from the top, so you kind of have like a little ball here. And then once again, kind of try to roll it a little bit more. Again, pop any of these little bubbles that are here. So fold this over, kind of start shaping, and then once again you can do kind of what they call like the push and pull, or you want to build tension again on the top, so you're kind of just like turning. So this is where you decide if you need round, which is called a bowl, or a little bit more rectangular, which is a batard. I have 2 rounds and 2 rectangle bannetons that are ready. So I'm going to make this one more just like a circle. So I'm just going to get this in a nice circle shape. You can see that. Then I'm going to grab this banneton. I'm going to put my bench scraper under the dough and I'm going to flip it over, because you want the underside to be on the top, because then when you get ready to bake, you're going to flip this over. We're going to let this sit again for about another 10 minutes just to relax, and then we're going to do what's called stitching, which is just getting the dough on the bottom together a little bit better. But in the meantime, I'm just going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to go back to do. Get the bench scraper a little bit damp. The other one that's been waiting for a bit is over here. Again, I grabbed it, flip it over, just spread it out just a little bit. Okay, and again, on this one, let's just take the side, put it to the middle. We'll take this side, fold it up to the middle. And then there's like a big bubble that's forming right there. I'm going to stretch this just a little bit and start to roll. And kind of get this kind of tucked, kind of tuck the sides a little bit. Now I'll make this one into a rectangle, or what's called a batard. So first I'm going to start shaping it a little bit into a round, but then I'm just going to keep pulling it a little bit more. If needed, I can pick it up back it up a little bit and then just pull it a little bit more so it's forming it into a little bit more of a rectangle. Again, you can kind of tuck the sides under. So it's just a little bit oblong. It's not significantly oblong. Again, you can like pinch this together if you need to get that a little bit more kind of closed up. And then here is the rectangular one. Once again, you're going to put the bench scraper underneath, and then you're going to flip the dough over. Now, what you can also do if you think this is a little bit sticky is add more rice flour to it. So if I grab this, I can grab some of this flour and I can just like pull the dough a little bit, and I'm just going to sprinkle it kind of on the sides all around. That way we aren't concerned at all with it sticking. It may not stick, but especially since this one is a little bit overproofed, potentially it could. Now, I don't really want to get too much on the top here because I do want to stitch it together. So mainly just along the sides. Again, just to make sure. I don't do that very often, but with this being a little bit overproofed, I think I'm going to make sure. And these have to rest just a few more minutes, and I will be back. I will shape those in a little bit, and then I'll show you the stitching. We want to kind of pinch this dough together. It's called stitching, to just build a little bit more tension on the top. Again, I put flour on this first. I should have probably waited because some of this may not want to stick because I did put a little bit of that rice flour, but we want to just kind of get this pinched a little bit together. And then if you want, you can pull the end up just a bit. I'm going to show you with the other one as well because I didn't put any flour on that one. But again, we just want to kind of pinch it. And then what I'm going to do is put a plastic bag around this, tie it up, and then put this in the refrigerator for cold proofing, and then it will be ready to go. Okay, here's the round one. Again, we're going to just try to pinch the dough together just to make almost like a seam. I guess that's why it's called stitching. Again, I usually have two hands to kind of pull the dough together, but you get the idea. You just kind of want to pinch the dough together, and then you can just pull the end over, kind of get it to stick there. Pull this end over just a little bit, kind of get it to stick. It doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously, you just want it to build a little bit more tension on the top, so it's not as loose, so that when it bakes, it will have more spring. Okay, it's Friday afternoon. It's about 4:15, 4:20-ish or so. I have time to let the oven heat up while I work, and then I'll be able to bake the bread at the end of my workday, hopefully the end of my workday. Basically what I'm doing at this point is doing the preheat. Normally when I make bread, I actually do a cold Dutch oven, turn it on and put the bread in there right from the start cold. But because it was, I think, potentially overproofed because I did it overnight and it rose more than I thought, I didn't want to put it in the oven cold because that extra time it takes for it to warm up, then, you know, the gluten could be eaten up more as well. So I am going to do the preheat. I just turned on the oven. So once it gets to 450, I'm going to let it heat for another 30 minutes. So it's actually, you know, heating the Dutch oven and everything at the 450 degrees. So it usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes for my oven to get from 0 to 450, and then another 30 minutes, you know, to warm up. Then I'll show you at the, when those come out, kind of my next steps, what I do for the bread, or, you know, scoring or things like that too. I'll bring that out, the bread a little bit before the oven is ready and show you those next steps. But again, normally when I prepare dough, I make sure that I cut off the bulk ferment where it's not overproofed. I will cold proof it, usually at least overnight. But I'm going to go ahead and bake two. I know Rebecca needs some bread we're basically out of bread as well. So I'll just go ahead and bake 2 of the loaves today. I will give 1 to Rebecca, keep 1 for us. And then in a couple days, I'll bake the other 2 that I have prepared. So I will show you in a little while what I will be doing with the bread. Okay, the oven is hot. The Dutch ovens have been heating actually more than 30 minutes now after getting to 450 degrees. So what I'm going to be doing is getting the bread ready to pop into the Dutch oven. So let me just show you actually what I have here that I use and kind of why. Okay. So I have a spray bottle here. This is the one I was talking about last night too, that I often use to spray my hands when I'm working with the dough. We're going to spritz the bread to moisten it. If I want to add any of the rice flour on top so the design kind of stands out, I can do that. I think what I will do for this one is maybe put it on one, but not the other. And then at the end you can see what will happen after it's baked. I started using steamer baskets under the dough for most of the cooking. And then for the last 10 minutes or so, when I take the lids off, then I will take these out. And then the bread is only sitting on the bottom of the Dutch oven for about 10 minutes. So it does start to get brown on the bottom, but I found it just got so dark and crisp, it was hard to cut through. And so this is what I use now just to put the bread on to keep it elevated and not too dark. Obviously, I use a cutting board to help actually get the dough flipped from the banneton into basically ready to put into the Dutch oven. And then I have these slings. You can use parchment paper, but Garth found actually this one that was at Valley Forge wholesale or whatever it's called. I cut it to be this shape. It was rectangular and hard to fit. After I cut it, I learned some of them are what's the word I'm trying to think of? I forget the word right now, but some of them might have splinters. So you don't want to, but this one, I don't think it did have that because I don't feel anything actually coming out of here. But they say some of these might have where it could have where little splinters of the material could get into the bread. This one was given to me, and then this is how I store my dough in the refrigerator. I just wrap it in a plastic bag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up in a minute. I'm going to show you how I will be putting that into the oven. And then I do have a lame, it's L-A-M-E, that comes with some of the sets that you buy that you can use to score the bread. Garth actually bought me this knife. It actually looks like a bird. It's kind of funny. But I use this now. The lame, if you want to get a large ear on your bread, which means when you cut it, it has kind of like a tall piece of bread. It's thin. It gets really crispy. A lot of people think that makes a fabulous looking loaf. Then you want to have a lame and you want to cut at a 45-degree angle, basically like parallel like this, so that it gets under the dough and it lifts. I don't prefer that. So I can still use the lame if I want to, but then I would cut straight down instead of at an angle. Again, Garth gave me this knife. I'm going to be using this knife to do any of the cutting. On a bowl, which is the round, which will be this one, you generally don't want to do lengthwise, you know, like one long cut. You usually do like an X or a plus mark. Let me just pause this and get this open and then I'll show you. Okay, first of all, you can see that this dough rose even after putting it in the refrigerator, and it's because it takes a while for your dough to get down to refrigerator temperature. It could take hours, so the dough continues to ferment and rise until it gets to the cold temperature where then it kind of goes into hibernation mode. This one is also a smaller bowl, so it actually, for the amount of dough, fills up the container more than some of the others, but you definitely can see how this has risen. So again, once I have to flip this, I'm going to need 2 hands. I'm going to put this down. But what I do is I just get the sling and I put it over the top of the bowl. And then I'm going to get the cutting board to put on top, and then I'm going to flip it. Okay, so I just flipped it out of the bowl. I am going to cut it, and actually in this case, because the way that the material is in here, it actually has a seam down on either side. So it almost makes like the little plus on here. You could actually follow that guideline if you wanted to just do your plus. So that's what I'm going to end up doing when I cut this. But one of the things that I also do is I spritz it with water. Because your dough, you want it to have steam when it's first cooking. That keeps the dough soft and it allows it to expand. Now there is moisture already in the bread, so you may not need it, but I found it's helpful. It also adds the texture on the outside of the dough. You'll see like little blisters. That's because of the water that you add. So what I do, again, I just take this. Let me just get it ready to spritz. It is not wanting to spritz. Sometimes you have to, there we go. So it spritz. So I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. I basically spritz all around the edges, kind of on the top. If I were going to add the flour, I would probably make sure like I smooth this all over to make sure that there was moisture on all of it. But I'm doing it more just for the texture and to have some of the steam. Let me open this knife. Actually, I'm not going to cut it yet until I have the other one ready as well. I like to cut them right before I put them in the oven. So let me get the other one prepped as well. I forgot to mention one thing before I take this out. Remember how I said I thought the dough was overproofed? You can do what's called a poke test. And if you depress the dough and it springs back right away, it usually means that it is underproofed and you should bulk ferment for longer. If you press on it and it slowly rises and it gets back almost to where it was before, then it's nicely proofed. It's just about perfect. And if it stays depressed, which I don't know if you could see, I pushed it down and it didn't really pop back up again, that basically is tending to show it's overproofed. This might just be slightly overproofed. It did pop up a little bit, but let me just show you. You just depress it and see it does come up a little bit, but not completely. So I believe that this again is probably a little bit overproofed, but I still think we'll probably have a decent loaf. I don't think it's too severely overproofed, but we'll see once it's done baking how much it rose and all of that. You can also tell just from this one, it has spread out a little bit more. If it spreads a little bit, it's lost a little bit of its structure because basically the yeast has eaten a lot of the dough. So that's another reason why I didn't want to cut this until I'm basically ready to put it in, because it does seem to be just a little bit overproofed. It lost some of its height and it has spread just a bit. Okay, as you can see on this one, I did go ahead and put some rice flour on there, and when it bakes, then you'll have some white. I didn't put a whole lot, you can still see the dough, but you'll have some white and then some brown. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and quickly cut this. So, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. You want to cut, so it's an expansion score. You want the bread to kind of open up along where you cut, instead of, if you don't score it, it will find the weakest point, and that's where it will, whoops. I don't usually put it on the steamer before I cut it, but my other cutting board is in use for something else. And so I'm just gonna kind of go through here a little bit, try to get it cut. Some people will open up their oven after about 5 to 7 minutes and cut it again. I might try, just because this is overproofed and I want this to continue to expand. I might try that. We will see. I usually don't. I usually just cut it and put it in the oven. Anyway, so we'll have a nice place for that to expand. Then on this one, just to show you kind of slightly different, like a little bit of a pattern, I think what I'll do is just try to make a nice little leaf on here. Let me just see if I can maybe do this, just to have like a pretty leaf. Again, this isn't necessarily the actual expansion score. This is more a little bit decorative. It doesn't have to be as deep. Just put a little line through the middle, maybe just a couple little lines here. Just something simple. I'm not really artistic. Whoops, and I didn't really have that on screen while I did it. And then a bigger expansion score we can just do along the side here. So let me just do that. Go a little bit deeper. So I now have put the Dutch ovens into the oven, lids on, and I'm going to set that for about 40 minutes. Then I will take the lids off. I'll insert thermometers just to check the temperature, make sure I get up to the 205 to 210 degrees. And then we will make sure like the bread is perfectly cooked. One thing I forgot to mention, a lot of people do say throw ice cubes into your Dutch ovens to add the extra steam. You don't really need that, especially if you spray the bread. And again, there's moisture. But if you have enameled Dutch ovens, if you put ice in enameled, very hot Dutch ovens, it could actually mess up the interior, crack it, break it. You don't want to do that. If you just have like the black cast iron, you could, but again, it's not necessary. So anyway, when this is done with the first 40 minutes, then we'll take a look and see how it is. Okay, the timer just went off for me to take the lids off of the pots. Once again, once I take the lids off, I'm going to try to grab the steamer basket that was keeping the bread off of the bottom to make sure that it didn't get too dark. And then I'm going to insert thermometers in there so I can measure the temperature. Garth again got me some expensive thermometers. And so anyway, I'm just going to put it in. I used to put it in at the beginning when I was first going to cook the dough and track the whole time it was cooking, but I don't do that any longer. So let me see if I can show you what I'm doing. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hold this with one hand and do everything that I need to do. So I might have to just put it down in a bit, but let's see what happens. Of course, and actually let me get my thermometers close to me on this side since I'm going to be opening the oven. All right, so I'm gonna take off the lid. Whoops, actually that one rose pretty nicely. Both of them rose pretty nicely. And I'm gonna just insert the thermometer. And then I'm going to, I have these grabbers. I'm gonna just try to get underneath here. I'm usually using two hands to try to get this done, but let's see if I can. All right, so I got that one out. And then let me try the same thing here. This would be easier if I had two hands. All right. Anyway, so I'm going to put this in the oven now for at least another 10 minutes or so. I'll monitor the temperature. Oops. And we'll go from there. Okay, they are out of the oven, and I have to say I'm actually surprised at how tall they did get, since I did think they were overproofed, and I thought that they may not rise very much. You can't necessarily see from the top, but let's just see. So here's the round one. Here's what the rectangular one looks like. We did have a little bit of an issue still in terms of like the scoring. You could see it's not as well defined, which probably is because it was a little bit overproofed. You can see what I was talking about, the flour. See the white flour. When you're doing a design, sometimes it is nice to have that too, just so you can see the difference between the interior and the exterior. You can see though that did open nicely on the side with that score, so it did expand quite a bit, which is really nice. But anyway, this is the final bread. So we're gonna let this cool for a couple hours. You usually do not cut into it when it's hot. It continues cooking after you take it out of the oven. And if you cut it too soon, it could become gummy. So I'm gonna cover this just with a kitchen towel and let it cool down for the next couple hours. Okay, the log that I use, it basically grades the bread on different things. Number one, the rise. Number 2, your scoring. Number 3, the crust. Number 4, the crumb, which is when you cut it open, what it looks like on the inside. And then number 5, the taste. Now, when I make bread, I don't like it to be very holy, like on the inside. I don't like big holes. I like small holes, so that you can still put things on it and it doesn't all fall through. Although usually if you put butter or jelly or something, it could still go through the holes. But I'm going to cut this open and I'm going to show you what it looks like on the inside, and we can get an idea of the crumb. Okay, so here it is. You can see there are, some decent sized holes, but again, a lot of them are smaller. That's how I like it. It is crispy on the outside here, but it's very soft on the inside. So this turned out actually pretty well, considering I thought it was going to be overproofed.